The brochures lay scattered across the oak coffee table in David Parker's living room, their glossy pages filled with golden beaches, deep blue waves, and smiling couples walking hand in hand along the shoreline. The words Maui Resort shimmered in gold letters across one cover, promising ocean views, private beach access, and fine dining. Lauren, David's daughter, leaned forward in her chair, her manicured fingers tracing the photos as if she could already feel the warm sand under her feet. Her husband, Bradley, peered over her shoulder, nodding at each detail. On the couch sat Bradley's parents, Walter and Margaret Mitchell, flipping through the pages as though the trip were already theirs. "This place is perfect," Lauren announced with bright enthusiasm. 4 bedrooms, ocean view, private beach access. It even has a concierge service. David reached for one of the brochures, a small smile forming on his face. "That sounds wonderful. When do we—" Lauren's hand intercepted his, gently but firmly pushing the glossy paper away. "You are too old for such adventures, Dad. You should stay home and watch the house for us." The words landed with a cold sting. David blinked, certain he had misheard her. "Too old?" "Yes," Lauren replied with a casual tone that stung all the more. "Besides, we are flying with Bradley's mom and dad. It has always been their dream trip." Walter chuckled. "Been saving for this for years. Can't wait to see those sunsets." Margaret smiled warmly. "The kids will love snorkeling." David stared at them. Walter was 64, 2 years older than him. Margaret was 61. Yet somehow, he was considered too old, while they were ideal travel companions. "I have never been to Hawaii," David said quietly. Bradley shrugged. "Maybe next time, Pops. This trip is kind of a family thing." Family. The word pressed against David's chest like a heavy stone. He watched as they planned every detail around him, speaking over him, as though he were simply part of the furniture. Lauren pulled out her phone to show Margaret pictures of restaurants they had researched. Bradley pointed at a page with kayaking tours. "The flight leaves Thursday morning," Lauren said without looking at him. "We will be gone for 10 days. You will have the whole place to yourself. Think of it as a little vacation, too." A vacation from what? David thought silently. From providing a home without rent for 5 years? From cooking dinners that went barely acknowledged? From listening to Bradley's endless complaints about money while charging his gaming devices on David's electricity? He rose from his chair slowly, his knees reminding him of his 62 years. "I should probably get some things in order then, for house sitting." "You are the best, Dad," Lauren said, flashing a smile that once melted his heart when she was a little girl asking for bedtime stories. Now it felt calculated, almost rehearsed. Walter lifted his coffee mug in a mock toast. "To family vacations," he said, and they all laughed together. Even Margaret, who had only met David a handful of times, felt comfortable enough to laugh at his exclusion in his own home. David stepped toward the hallway, their animated voices chasing him. He could still hear them planning helicopter rides, sunset dinners, and snorkeling trips, adventures he had apparently aged out of overnight. The hardwood floor creaked beneath his feet, just as it had the night he and Sarah, his late wife, danced there on their 30th anniversary. Sarah would never have allowed this. She would have insisted he come along. She would have made it clear that family meant all of them, or none of them. But Sarah had been gone for 5 years now, and David was slowly realizing that the daughter they had raised together saw him very differently than he had imagined. Night settled gently over Maple Street, and the house eased into its usual rhythms. Downstairs, the last of the coffee smell faded from the kitchen, while the ceiling fan turned in slow, steady circles. David sat on the edge of his bed, a mystery novel closed in his lap, the soft lamplight brushing the framed photograph of Sarah on the dresser. He meant to lose himself in familiar pages, to trade the sting of the evening for the comfort of a good story. But a rise and fall of voices drifted up through the old heating vent near his feet. The vent had always carried the soundtrack of family life through these rooms. When the grandchildren were small, their laughter would tumble upward like wind chimes, a sound that made the whole house smile. Now the same thin grill sent up words that did not belong to love at all. At first the conversation below was a murmur, broken by the clink of cups and the rustle of glossy brochures. Then Bradley's voice came clear, as if the vent had leaned closer to listen. He said they had found a nursing home with an opening, the good kind with organized activities and nice common rooms. Walter asked about a deposit. Margaret answered that $3,000 would hold the room and speed the paperwork. Lauren's reply was sharper, quick and sure, like a pen scratching a signature. She said it made sense, that it was time, that a professional setting would take the worry off everyone. She said, almost kindly, that David had always needed looking after. The book in David's hands slipped closed without a sound. He moved a little closer to the vent, his palm resting on the cool metal. The words were plain enough now. Sunset Manor. A deposit wired before they came back from Hawaii. A plan to sell the house because the market was strong. Because they knew a realtor who could move fast. Because inheritance should not sit idle in bricks when it could be properly put to use. Zachary Allen's name floated up, followed by expected numbers, by a confident split into 4. The tone below was practical, even cheerful, the way people sound when discussing a new kitchen or a fresh coat of paint. Margaret laughed lightly about how demanding he had become, about how he always wanted to be included. Walter said something about responsibility, about doing what families must do. Bradley asked whether the furniture should be listed or left for staging. Lauren spoke over them, steady and organized, and called David gullible in the same voice she used to ask about dinner plans. Each word fit together like puzzle pieces, a clear picture forming in the dark. 5 years slid across David's mind like pages turning. He saw Bradley on the porch with shoulders slumped and a voice full of rain, telling a story about betting apps and tokens that were supposed to go only up, about a house on the brink of foreclosure, about an infant asleep in a car seat and a second child on the way. He saw Lauren crying in the kitchen, promising that this was temporary, that they would repay every cent, that they only needed a place to breathe. He saw himself opening the door, setting extra plates at the table, making up the spare bedroom, and telling them to rest. He remembered the cost of a new roof when storms came, the quiet signing of checks for medical bills when insurance lapsed, the steady hum of higher utilities when 5 became 1 household. He remembered tracking the numbers in the small notebook Sarah had suggested, each line a little act of faith that the tide would turn. Downstairs, the conversation did not waver. They spoke about timing, about how smoothly the transition would go if everything stayed quiet, about how best to frame the decision so that David would feel grateful. They wanted to avoid upset. They wanted to keep him calm. They wanted to do what needed to be done before he could dig in his heels. They spoke as if he were a matter to be handled, as if the man who had kept this roof over their heads for 5 years were a task on a list to be checked off and forgotten. The house seemed to tilt for an instant, not from any flaw in its frame, but from a change in the air. David steadied himself with a hand on the dresser. The lamplight touched Sarah's smile. He had always loved the softness in her eyes, the way she could stand firm without raising her voice. She never used humiliation to win a point. She never confused kindness with weakness. He could almost hear her gentle question now, the one she saved for moments when life turned hard. What would dignity do? He listened again. Margaret named the nursing home. Walter spelled the street. Lauren said she had already spoken with a real estate agent who believed the house could fetch a strong price with minimal updates. Bradley said he would handle the conversation when the time came, and his voice carried an ease he had never found when job hunting. They imagined a future where this address belonged to them, where the proceeds patched the holes in their finances, where the father who had fed and housed them became a recurring fee paid to strangers. A memory rose without asking. The night Sarah and David danced on these hardwood floors to an old song on the radio, their steps small and careful, his palm warm against her back. The house had felt alive, its quiet a secret they shared. That quiet was still here, but the secret had changed. It lived in the vent's thin breath, in words not meant for a man who had once been the center of this home. The change settled in David's chest, cool and clear. He crossed the room and opened the drawer where his notebook lay. Page after page held the math of love. Grocery totals, utility increases, car repairs, gifts for children who had yet to say thank you, promises written in careful curves that never turned into payment. He traced a line with the tip of his finger and felt the steadiness return. Numbers did not lie. They did not flatter or blame. They told the shape of a story with quiet honesty. The numbers now said that kindness had been mistaken for surrender, that generosity had been mistaken for a bottomless well, that a boundary long postponed needed to be drawn in permanent ink. Downstairs, a chair scraped, a door closed. The conversation thinned to footsteps and yawns. David placed the notebook back in the drawer and turned off the lamp. Darkness pressed gently against the windows. In the hallway, the old floor offered its soft, familiar creak. The house was a vessel filled with every version of their lives. It would not tell him what to do. It would not stop him either. He sat on the edge of the bed and let the night breathe. He pictured the brochures on the table, the way the light had turned the water to liquid gold. He pictured the airport, the morning rush, the way people in line thanked the agent with a smile and a patient nod. He pictured a printed sign on a notary's desk, the calm authority of stamped paper, the clean transfer of a deed from one hand to another. He pictured a storage unit with neat rows of labeled boxes, everything in its place, nothing left to chance. He heard Sarah's question again, bright as a bell and soft as a touch. What would dignity do? He knew the answer, and it did not require raised voices or slammed doors. It required clarity. It required a timeline of his own choosing. It required a steady hand and a willingness to be thought hard when all he was being, at last, was fair. He breathed in and out, felt the certainty settle like a stone at the bottom of a clear lake, and allowed the silence to grow thick and kind around him. David sat silent in the dark, but a plan had already begun to form in his mind. Morning arrived soft and pink over Windermere, and the house felt unusually light, as if it already knew it would be quieter by noon. In the kitchen, David rinsed a ceramic mug and set the coffee maker to brew. The familiar scent rose like a small comfort. He placed a clean napkin beneath the mug, a habit Sarah had started because a napkin made everything feel more thoughtful. He could hear Lauren in the hallway, her tone bright and efficient. Bradley dragged a suitcase across the hardwood with the hopeful scrape of wheels. Walter and Margaret compared sunscreen varieties in the living room and spoke about ocean breezes like experts who had been born on the shore. Lauren swept into the kitchen holding printed itineraries. The paper edges were crisp and perfectly aligned. "We leave from Orlando International this morning," she said, tapping the top page. "The flight is at 10:15. We want to be on the road by 8:30 to be safe." She glanced at the counter as if a schedule belonged there beside the salt and pepper. "Dad, while we are gone, please water the plants on the patio every other day. The basil will bolt if it gets neglected in this heat." Bradley leaned against the refrigerator and reached for a banana. "Also," he added, "just keep an eye on the mail. I set up a hold, but you know how things slip through." Walter smiled and raised his travel wallet. "I have our boarding passes and a printed map for the rental car," he announced, pleased with the sturdy weight of planning. Margaret set a tidy list beside David's mug. "We wrote down the service numbers in case anything breaks. Just call and someone will come." David nodded, unhurried. His calm was not a performance. It was a decision. He poured coffee, offered the pot to the others, and smiled when Walter accepted a splash without sugar. The kitchen hum grew cheerful as departure gathered speed. Suitcases lined up in the foyer like soldiers waiting for inspection. Bradley checked the weather in Maui and reported a light breeze and pleasant temperatures. Lauren leaned across the counter to kiss David's cheek and said, "Thank you for watching the house, Dad. We appreciate you." The words were smooth, as if polished for company, but they did not land. They passed through the room like a breeze, harmless and brief. The rideshare app flashed a delay, then a cancellation. Traffic on the interstate was heavy after an early fender bender, the message said. Bradley frowned and pushed at his hair. "Great. Just great. We cannot miss this flight." David set his mug down gently. "I can drive you," he said. "It is no trouble." The relief was instant. Lauren clapped her hands together once. That would be wonderful. We will be out the door in 5 minutes. The drive east on Interstate 4 folded them into the morning rush, a river of headlights and turn signals moving toward the same horizon. Bradley took the passenger seat and tracked the estimated arrival time on his phone while trying not to seem anxious about it. Walter and Margaret spoke softly in the back about the first thing they would do when they saw the ocean. Lauren flicked through a set of photos of the resort, pausing on a shot of a curved pool with a perfect line of loungers. Between highway signs, David asked if anyone needed water. He made a steady lane change and thanked a driver who waved him in. He kept the radio off. The quiet felt respectful, as if the day were large and did not want to be interrupted by noise. At the drop-off, doors opened like little declarations. Bradley unloaded the suitcases and stacked them near the curb with their handles facing outward. Lauren hugged David and smelled faintly of citrus and hairspray. "You are the best," she said, words she had used countless times and would use again. They joined the line of travelers who moved toward the terminal doors. Walter turned for a last wave, a single hand lifted in a salute of polite gratitude. Margaret called out, "Take care of yourself, David. We will bring you something small." David lifted his palm in return. He meant his response. "Drive safely," he said, and watched them disappear into the flow. The air changed when he slid back behind the wheel. It was not freedom exactly. It was clarity. He drove home through a brighter traffic pattern, past a diner where a server refilled coffee without being asked, past a park where early walkers greeted one another with the small courtesy of city neighbors. When he stepped into the kitchen again, the late morning light had shifted. The house held its breath, as if waiting to know what kind of day it would be. He set the car keys on the counter, opened a drawer, and took out the small notebook where he had tracked the math of the last 5 years. He did not need to consult it now. He only needed to feel its familiar weight. He placed it beside the phone. Then he lifted the receiver and dialed a number he had memorized from the night before. "Zachary Allen Realty," said a clear voice on the second ring. "This is Zachary speaking." David introduced himself and kept his voice calm and simple. "I would like to sell my house quickly. I can be available right away for a walkthrough." Zachary did not hesitate. "Where are you located, sir?" "Windermere, near Maple Street," David answered. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, updated kitchen, new roof 5 years ago. Zachary's tone warmed with professional interest. "I can be there within the hour," he said. "We can talk options for a cash close and minimal contingencies if speed is your priority." "That would be helpful," David replied. "I will have the deed and insurance information ready." The house seemed to straighten its shoulders. David collected the documents from Sarah's old jewelry box, placed them in a neat stack on the dining table, and opened the blinds so the rooms could be seen in their best light. He checked the lawn from the window and saw Elizabeth across the way, watering her hibiscus with the patient slow pour of someone who had learned to do most things with care. She lifted her hand in a neighbor's greeting. He waved back and smiled. At exactly the time promised, a sedan pulled into the driveway. Zachary was younger than David expected, a navy jacket over an open-collared shirt despite the heat, a tape measure and tablet in hand. He greeted David with a firm handshake and took off his sunglasses with a quick, polite motion. "Thank you for making time for me today," he said. "I understand the urgency. Let us walk through and set a plan that matches your timeline." In the entryway, Zachary paused to appreciate the original hardwood floors. He noted the crown molding and the way the afternoon light fell across the living room wall. In the kitchen, he complimented the quartz counters. He asked brief, efficient questions about the age of the appliances and the condition of the air system. His tone carried no judgment, only a clear focus on getting from first step to last without drama. In the dining room, he explained the path to a quick sale. "For speed, we target cash buyers," he said, tapping notes on his tablet. "We keep contingencies light, price with the timeline in mind, and drive toward a closing date inside 2 weeks. We will need a signed listing agreement and proof of clear title." He slid a form across the table for David to read. "There is always a trade-off between speed and price," he continued. "I will advocate for you. You decide what matters most." David read carefully and asked the questions Sarah would have asked. He did not rush. When he signed, he did so with a steady hand that felt older and steadier than the one that had signed mortgage checks and field trip permissions. Zachary gathered the pages, stood, and smiled in a way that did not oversell good news. "I will start calling immediately," he said. "Expect a first showing as early as tomorrow. If a qualified investor likes what he sees, we can move very fast." The front door closed with a quiet click after Zachary left. The house exhaled. David stepped into the living room and looked around. Without the sound of suitcases and layered voices, the space held only the cool shuffle of the ceiling fan and the soft ticking of a wall clock. The brochures still sat on the coffee table, bright islands of blue water and honeyed sand. He reached for one and folded it once, then set it aside. He did not need pictures to imagine a shoreline. He needed a timeline, and now he had one. He walked the room slowly, touching door frames with his fingertips the way one says a farewell without calling it by its name. In the bedroom, he lifted Sarah's photo and held it at arm's length to catch the light, then returned it carefully to the dresser. In the hallway, a floorboard gave its old familiar creak, the one that had always told him he was home. He stood very still, not out of sorrow, but out of respect. He had kept this house full when others emptied it. He had carried people who forgot the weight of being carried. The room did not argue. It did not forgive. It simply stood as it had always stood, patient and strong. From the doorway, David looked back once more and listened to the quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a mower droned, steady and unhurried. The day had tipped from morning toward afternoon. He reached for the light switch, then left it as it was. The sun would handle the rest. As he closed the door behind him, he knew that from this hour forward the game had changed. The Monday morning sun spilled over Orlando in soft golden light, painting the quiet streets in a warm glow. For the first time in years, the house felt entirely mine, but it was also on the verge of no longer being mine at all. Today was the day everything would become official. Steam curled from the mug of black coffee on the kitchen table, the rich aroma mingling with the faint scent of freshly polished wood floors. Next to it, a neat stack of property documents sat waiting. Deed, tax records, identification, all arranged in perfect order. My eyes lingered on them, knowing that by the end of the day, they would be out of my hands forever. My phone buzzed. "Morning, David," Zachary's upbeat voice came through. "Just confirming we're still good for 11 o'clock at Martinez Notary in downtown Orlando?" "We're good," I said, glancing once more at the paperwork. "Bring your ID and the deed. James Clark will be there, and Linda Martinez will walk us through the process. We'll have you out in under an hour." After the call ended, I let my hand rest on the top folder. Sarah would have understood. She always believed in protecting our independence, in never letting anyone else dictate our future. That memory pulled me back 5 years, to a time when the house was full of voices and I'd opened the door out of compassion. Back then, I told myself I was helping my daughter and her family get back on their feet. I hadn't realized I was giving away control over my own life. Shaking off the thought, I moved through the rooms, gathering the last personal items that still belonged to me. A framed wedding photo of Sarah and me on Daytona Beach, her small jewelry box, the one with the secret compartment where I kept the deed. My expense ledger, worn from years of notes in neat red ink. Room by room, I closed the doors behind me. The sound of each latch clicking into place felt final, like sealing a chapter I would never reopen. By mid-morning, I was pulling into a parking spot outside a modest 2-story building with a bronze plaque that read, "Martinez Notary Legal Services." Inside, the cool air carried the faint scent of paper and ink. Zachary stood near the reception desk, dressed in a navy suit, phone in hand. "David, glad you made it." James Clark, the buyer, rose from a nearby chair. His handshake was firm, his smile polite but businesslike. "Let's get you taken care of," Zachary said, leading the way into a glass-walled conference room. Linda Martinez, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, was already seated with a stack of legal forms. She greeted me warmly and gestured toward the chair opposite her. "All right, Mr. Parker," she began. "This is the deed transfer document. Once you sign, Ownership of 847 Maple Street will officially pass to Pinnacle Investment Holdings. Her words were clear, measured, but I could feel the weight behind them. This was the point of no return. My pen hovered for a fraction of a second before I signed my name in deliberate, steady strokes. James slid a folder toward me. Here's confirmation of the wire transfer. Funds will be in your account by end of day. His tone was brisk, efficient, as if we'd just completed a routine business transaction, not the sale of a home where I'd spent decades of my life. Linda's smile was professional but genuine. Congratulations, Mr. Parker. A new beginning. Outside, the midday heat wrapped around me as I walked back to my car. I sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the reality settle in. It was over. The house no longer belonged to me, and that was exactly the way I wanted it. I drove back one final time, pulling into the driveway and unlocking the front door. The rooms echoed now, stripped bare of the furniture and voices that once filled them. I walked slowly through each space. The living room where Sarah and I had danced, the kitchen where I'd overheard my family plotting, the bedroom where I'd decided to take my life back. When I stepped into the foyer, sunlight streaming across the hardwood, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, the area code unmistakable. Hawaii. I let it ring. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket, closed the door behind me, and locked it for the very last time. The lock clicked with a finality that felt almost ceremonial. Keys in hand, I stepped off the front porch and walked toward my car, the Florida heat shimmering over the pavement. By the time I reached the driver's seat, my phone buzzed again. Same Hawaii area code. I started the engine but let the call ring out. I wasn't ready to speak. Not yet. As I pulled away from 847 Maple Street, I glanced in the rearview mirror. James Clark was already in the driveway, phone to his ear, likely talking to his property manager. The house was his problem now. I drove to my small apartment on the other side of Orlando, the place I'd chosen precisely because it was modest, quiet, and entirely mine. No uninvited footsteps in the hallways. No one borrowing my car or leaving dishes piled in the sink. Just me, four walls, and a door that locked against the world. Inside, I placed the house keys on the kitchen counter. They wouldn't be going back to Lauren or Bradley, not in 100 years. I poured myself a glass of cold water and leaned against the counter, savoring the stillness. The phone buzzed again. Same number. I answered this time, my voice calm. Hello? Dad, it's me. Lauren's voice was tight, too tight to hide the panic. We just got back to Florida. There are strangers in the house. They said they bought it from you. What's going on? I let a slow pause fill the air. That's correct. The house is sold. You sold it? Her voice cracked. Without telling us? Without telling you? I repeated evenly. Lauren, it's my house. I didn't need to tell you anything. In the background, Bradley's voice erupted. Ask him where our stuff is. Your belongings, I said, are in a storage unit on Colonial Drive. 6 months paid in advance. The manager has the key. This is insane. Bradley's voice cut sharper now, closer to the phone. You can't just... I can, I interrupted, my tone flat. And I did. The line went silent for a moment. Then Margaret's voice came faintly in the background. Ask him where he is. Where are you? Lauren demanded. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Let's just say I'm somewhere warm. Somewhere with a better view than my old living room. There was a pause long enough for realization to set in. You're in Hawaii? She asked, her voice breaking between disbelief and outrage. I am, I said simply. Enjoy your hotel. I'm enjoying mine. Before she could respond, I ended the call. The phone buzzed again within seconds, but I turned it face down on the counter and walked to the balcony. The Orlando sunset flared in the distance, streaks of gold and red fading into the darkening sky. For the first time in years, I felt light, not just free of their presence, but free of their control. They had planned my future without me. Now I was living mine without them. Morning light laced the palm fronds outside his window, and the ocean moved with an easy confidence that seemed to match his own. David sat at a small table on the terrace, a modest breakfast set neatly before him, steam rising from a cup of coffee that tasted bright and clean. The resort stirred to life around him in gentle ways, a housekeeper's cart rolling quietly along the walkway below, a concierge offering directions with a courteous smile, the distant chatter of families making plans for the day. He had chosen silence over spectacle. It suited him. He opened his phone and found a new stack of missed calls and messages, each one carrying a different note of urgency. He did not play any of them yet. He gave the morning the first word. When he did listen, it was to Lauren's latest voicemail. The edge in her voice had dulled. She sounded tired, not from flights or jet lag, but from finally meeting a boundary that did not budge. She asked how they could collect their things in a way that worked for everyone. She said they would find another place to stay. She said she was sorry for her tone the day before and that she wanted to understand. David set the phone down and let the sea answer for a while, a long hush that encouraged patience. He poured more coffee and thought about the difference between anger and humility, between someone pressing for control and someone asking for a way forward. He typed slowly, careful with every word. He gave the address of the storage facility and the unit number. He explained that 6 months were already paid and that the manager could provide access. He added one clear sentence that had been years in the making. He said he would not discuss housing or money. He wished them well in finding work and stability and asked that they keep their conversations civil and brief. He did not list grievances or replay old scenes. He did not ask for promises or apologies. He pressed send and felt his breath settle. The day unfolded with the kind of simplicity he had once considered either dull or out of reach. He thanked the server who refilled his water and left a tip with quiet gratitude. He walked a palm-shaded path toward the beach, greeting a gardener in a green cap who was trimming hibiscus near a stone wall. The ocean held its steady color. The breeze carried a briny sweetness that rested low in the chest. None of it was loud. None of it needed to be proved or shared. A boundary is a quiet thing, like a line in soft sand that holds, because the hand that drew it will draw it again if needed. Elizabeth called late in the afternoon, her voice as familiar and reassuring as ever. She asked how he was doing, and laughed softly when he answered that he was eating more fruit than a sensible man should. Then she told him that she had seen Lauren pick up a copy of the storage key from the manager and that the exchange had been polite. No raised voices, no scene on the sidewalk. Just a young woman carrying a new weight with a careful grip. Elizabeth did not ask for details. She did not need a catalog of right and wrong. She asked only if David had everything he needed. He thanked her for watching, for watering her hibiscus with such patient devotion, for being a neighbor in the old-fashioned sense. Before they hung up, he asked about a community garden plot back in Orlando and whether they needed a retired pair of hands come planting season. Elizabeth said they always did. He slept well, the kind of sleep that is not an escape, but a thank you. In the morning, he checked out with a nod to the clerk who printed his receipt with unhurried efficiency. On the flight back, he declined a movie and watched the shape of clouds reshuffle across a blue expanse. He wrote nothing and planned nothing beyond the next right step. He remembered how many times he had been told what his next step should be. The difference being that this time the next step would be his. Orlando greeted him with sun and a ribbon of cars moving at a courtesy jog along the parkway. At Baldwin Park, his apartment waited with the light left off and the blinds tilted just so. He set his bag down and placed Sarah's photo on the shelf where it belonged, the same spot he had cleared with his hand on that first evening weeks ago. He set a bowl on the counter and put 2 oranges in it, a small, still life that made the little kitchen feel more like a place for beginnings than leftovers. He walked to the window, watched a neighbor clip a leash onto a terrier with the solemn focus that small dogs often inspire, and waved when the neighbor glanced up. A wave in return, nothing grand, just the kind of exchange that says a life has room for other lives without taking anything away. As the evening settled in, he took a slow walk around Lake Baldwin, the path wide enough for strollers and joggers, and the occasional pair of friends talking with their heads tilted close. A heron stood at the water's edge with the patience of a clock. Children on bicycles chimed their bells and said "excuse me" with the proud manners of new riders. The world did not move away from him. It made room. He found a bench and sat, watching the light soften toward amber and then toward a deeper blue. When he rose, it was with a quiet readiness rather than an agenda. Back home, he set his phone on the table and opened the expense notebook. The pages recorded 5 years of generosity and drift, each line a story told in the lightest ink. He did not read them now. He turned to a fresh page and wrote one final entry in careful script. Storage paid through 6 months. Boundaries set. Peace in place. He closed the cover and rested his hand on it for a moment, not as a guard, but as a blessing. Then he slid the notebook into a drawer that no longer held old roles for him to play. Instead of a confrontation, he chose a boundary. No more funding, no more manipulation, only a calm and final line that restored his self-respect and left the door open to better behavior should it come someday without demand. He turned off the lamp and let the room hold its shape in the dusk. Outside, a porch light clicked on across the courtyard, and a voice called a good night to someone heading upstairs. He returned to the table with one small task left. He opened the notebook again, wrote the date neatly on the line beneath his last note, and added 2 words. The first was "thank you," for lessons learned and for time returned. The second was enough. He closed the notebook for good and looked ahead to a different kind of page, the kind that does not need a ledger and does not carry any debt. The day had folded into a quiet evening, the kind that rests easily on a person's shoulders. A faint orange glow lingered along the horizon, and somewhere beyond it, waves kept their patient rhythm. David's journey had begun with a closed door, the sound of laughter that did not include him, and the sting of being underestimated. It ended here, in a place of his own choosing, where silence no longer meant exclusion but peace. The house, the arguments, the long years of compromise, they had all given way to something lighter, like a burden set down after being carried too far. In the calm after it all, there was no gloating, no grand speech of triumph. There was only a man who had remembered his worth and acted on it without raising his voice. What had been taken for weakness had turned out to be quiet strength, the kind that waits for the right moment to stand. His decision had not just changed where he lived, it had changed how he would live. The same hands that once opened the door for those who would push him aside had now closed it with intention and opened another toward a future he owned entirely. The heart of it was simple: hold to your dignity, speak your truth with grace, and protect the life you've built without apology. Justice does not always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes in the form of a signature on a page, or the steady act of walking away from what no longer serves you. Like a lighthouse that never shouts its presence yet keeps its beam steady, quiet resolve can guide you through the darkest waters and into safer shores. In the span of a few weeks, David had shown that the one others discounted could be the one holding the final say. For those listening, perhaps you have known a time when you were overlooked, when your years of giving seemed invisible to those who took without thanks. Maybe you have been told your season had passed, that your role was to stand still while others moved forward. If so, take from this story the truth that no one's value fades simply because it is ignored. We each carry the right to draw our own lines, to decide when enough is enough, and to step toward the life that fits the person we've become. So tonight, as you think about David's quiet stand, let it remind you of your own strength, whether it has been tested or is still waiting for its moment. And if this story has warmed something in you, consider passing that warmth along to someone who needs it. You never know who might be standing just beyond the edge of the light, waiting to be seen.